Hey guys, welcome back to the channel for another objective, no BS product discussion, this time on the Soundstream V2. Yes, indeed. I have been traveling quite a bit the last couple of months with the Soundstream V2 on the bike, and at this point I have over 10,000 miles using the head unit while traveling, including a 5-week period where I went over 72. What are you doing, bro? I got the right of way. Thank you. Where I've been using the head unit for that 7,200 mile trip. A lot of stuff to share with you. This will not be a feature rundown on everything with the V2. But I really what I want to do with this video is just kind of go over my experience, the good, the not so good, some recommendations, and a little feedback maybe on a couple of things on the product. But at the end, I will wrap up with giving you my recommendation for someone who's thinking about the V2 but hasn't pulled the trigger yet. Should you or shouldn't you? So we're going to start. I'm going to go over the marquee thing, or one of the marquee things with the radio is this beautiful screen. The screen is super large. It goes edge to edge on the, as far as the Boom GTS 6.5 replacement on a road glide and a street glide. And it is super bright. I mean, right now it's about 1:30. And I am out here on a bright sunny day, and you can see, although the sun is just a little bit in front of me at the moment, you can see how bright this screen is. It's really nice. I'll splice in some footage here. Obviously I'm in Carplay right now, but we'll switch over and I'll throw up some footage here of what it looks like just with the V2 interface, not with Carplay. So talking about the Carplay display, if you've got experience with Carplay, then you already know that by design, rightfully or wrongly, Apple's image for Carplay isn't super contrasting. It at times can look a little washed out on any display, and that certainly holds true here on the V2 as well. Although with the brightness of the V2 display, I mean, things are super readable almost 100% of the time. There are times that I've experienced where it was a little less readable, and that is usually, like, I can think of 2 times late evening or early evening coming across the Midwest where the sun was behind my back and was really coming right down at just the right angle on the screen. Wow, look at that when it's in the shade though. It looks really nice, doesn't it? But it was coming down right on the screen, just at the right angle to make it a little difficult to read, to the point where you'd have to kind of hold your hand up to shade it a little bit in Carplay. Now, you gotta remember, I'm on a road glide. That's as far as sun on a display in a road glide, you're always going to have an issue at some point if you're out all day, because the interfering of the road glide is slanted back and up. Oop, I just hit the info button, which threw me up by mistake on my handlebar right there, which threw up the bike info. So you can see that, and that's the native interface on the Soundstream V2. So I'm going to use a little switcher here. We'll eventually get back to Carplay, more on that in a minute. But yeah, super readable. The only thing that I would say as far as the display, when it comes to like Carplay in particular, I don't know anything about Android Auto, so you have to deal with that yourself. But for Carplay, it would be super nice if we had a way to adjust the contrast on the V2 screen. As it is right now, I don't know if this might change with firmware updates or something in the future, but as of right now, you cannot adjust the contrast or the brightness on the Soundstream V2. And there's just no setting for it. You can flip it into night mode, and you can do that manually. It does not flip from night mode to daytime mode or dark to light mode based on the amount of ambient light, because there is no sensor, right? This display goes edge to edge. There's no room for a sensor there, and I'm sure the decision was, do we reduce the size of the display to put a sensor in the bezel to be able to do that automatic adjustment? And rightfully so. Between those two decisions, more screen real estate is definitely worth it over the ambient based setting to go from dark to light mode. I guess the other thing they could have done was follow Apple's lead and put a sensor behind the screen and put a little notch in there or something, which, to me is not a big deal either, but their product, their decision, and yeah, I respect that. So that's a little bit about the screen. We may touch on a couple of other things, but what I want to do is I want to get, before we switch, let's talk about gloves, because touch first interface with this device, although you do have hand controls through the integration with the iDataLink Maestro, but touch first approach to designing this product, and it's not as sensitive as the Boom GTS was as far as gloves. I have several different pairs of gloves that I wear, and there are gloves that work well on the Boom GTS that don't work at all on the V2. And I don't know if that's a sensitivity, is a physical thing, or if it's a a setting that can be adjusted as they evolve the product. I don't know. I don't know much about that technology, other than my Odin gloves that I'm wearing here, that I wear in hot weather, as you can see, because they're severely discolored. Would work on my Boom GTS 6.5, will not work at all on the Soundstream V2. I have to pull the cover off and use my finger, and of course I don't do that much. Try to avoid that at all costs, because I'm on a road glide, and I'm not a really tall guy with lengthy arms, so it's a bit of an issue for me. But I'm sure, if you're on a street glide, boom, 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 it's right there in front of you. All right, so I want to get back to the house and set up a camera, and we're going to go over different aspects. We'll go over some of the setting screens and some UX items that I want to make sure that I give you my opinion on, and yeah, hopefully some constructive feedback for you there if you're listening Soundstream, and informative for those of you who aren't working in Soundstream. Let's get back to the house. The boot time on the V2 is quick. Not instantaneous, but it's very, very quick. I haven't used the home screen much since I mainly use Carplay, but it's nice to have basic information there and a quick way to access other features that you want to get to. This did come in handy one day on my trip as I was trying to figure out why my engine didn't sound quite right. It actually sounded super weird. I was able to see on the home screen very quickly, though, when I looked at it, that I had somehow inadvertently turned on the EITMS on my bike. No idea how that happened, but I was super happy to see that was the issue. Thank you, V2 home screen. You can customize the icons on the bottom of the screen to get one-touch access to the items that you use most, but you cannot remove icons from the screen. There will always be 7 showing on that grid. No big deal. The motorcycle info screen is basic, and I mainly use that to watch my tire pressure.
You can quickly pull that screen up by pressing the info button on your right hand controls, like I inadvertently did when we were riding around earlier. So let's talk a little bit about the audio. This is a radio, an audio device. The audio produced by the V2 is very clean. I replaced my stock head speakers with the Hertz, I always get this wrong, SX165 Neos in the fairing, while I still had my Boom GTS. The speakers alone were much cleaner and louder than my stock speakers with that old head unit. But the audio is on like super hyperdrive now with the V2. The audio from the V2 is noticeably louder than it was from the Boom GTS. Probably get about, I think, 30% more power, clean power coming out of the V2 over the Boom GTS. I've been able to listen to music on the interstate at high speed with a full face helmet and wearing my earpiece Moto Pro earplugs. And that's with no external amp. All I'm doing is running what's in the V2. If you're running more than just the two fairing speakers and an amp, there are a number of settings that you can adjust in the V2 for things like crossovers and subwoofers, yada yada. The V2 has a 15-band equalizer built in. It comes with a number of preset profiles and one custom profile that you can use to set as your own. I listen to podcasts a lot when I'm on long trips, so I've used that custom profile to set things up for podcasts. I don't really care for any of the built-in profiles as they're set from the factory, other than the flat profile. And if you select one of the built-in profiles, then tweak it, it actually overwrites your one custom profile. And the next time you switch back to the built-in preset, it's set back to the factory settings for that specific preset. So it would be great if Soundstream provided at least two custom profiles. Then I could set one for podcast and one for music and be done with it. All of that said, 95% of the time I'm listening to audio through my Cardo Edge. I'm going to do a separate video on connecting and using the Edge because, quite frankly, I spent several weeks trying to get everything working correctly with my Edge. And I attribute most of that to the fact that some of the initial guidance on how to set up the comms unit proved to be incorrect, at least in my case. And, you know, people are all over the place as far as how they're getting comms units connected and whether they're working or not. But I'm talking about my specific case. I'll try to get that video out next week. So if you're having issues with your comms unit, you might want to watch for that video when it drops. As far as navigation, I did use the iGo Primo navigation a bit during the trip just to test it out. The iGo navigation is, well, it's a typical built-in vehicle navigation solution. I don't know what more to say. It provides the user experience that you'd expect from that type of a solution. It takes a number of steps to enter the address of where you're going, which is a bit of a pain, but it adds some really nice touches like multi-waypoint routing. The directions seem to be dead on. I had no problems with that whatsoever. There are a ton of features and settings with the iGo. In fact, the 80-page V2 user manual is about 50 pages just on the iGo nav. There appears to be a lot there, but I didn't want to waste a lot of time with it during the trip. I tried it out for a few days just to try it. It does what I need it to do as an emergency solution in the event that I can't use my phone for a more modern navigation experience with CarPlay. And you know what? I guess I never expected to be more than what it is, so that's okay. Oh, but, and this is kind of a big but, you can't navigate the navigation with the hand controls. It's touch only. And, you know, that's a bit of a bitch on a road glide and something that you don't want to be jacking around with while you're out riding. CarPlay. Okay, here we go. One of the marquee features of the V2 is the built-in support for wireless CarPlay and Android Auto, along with being able to use your comms unit and pretty much any headset with a mic to interact with those platforms. I don't have an Android device, but from what I've heard loudly from other people, the problems have largely been the same between the two. First, let's talk about stability. Many people have been reporting issues with stability as far as disconnects with wireless CarPlay, and the fact that the V2 frequently goes into a black screen of death state when that happens. It happened to me several times a day for the first week I was on this road trip before I decided to go another direction, and more on that in a second. So what people have reported and what I've experienced myself is that the V2 screen suddenly goes black and is non-responsive to touch or hand controls. Except sometimes you can use the app switch button on your hand controls to toggle to other modules of the unit, but they're non-functional and sometimes they won't display. At one point, I was using the iGo Nav as a backup and could toggle to that on the switcher when the wireless CarPlay disconnected, but the screen was blacked out. It didn't display. The nav just didn't display. It wouldn't boot, or it was non-functional. Sometimes the radio will reboot itself after several minutes when things like this happen, and it'll be operational again. Sometimes it will not reboot, and you have to pull over, turn the bike off, sometimes let it set for a couple or a few minutes, then turn the bike back on to get the V2 to come back online. Now, this has been brought up and reported. The default answer on this is usually that the wireless communications will break from time to time due to the nature of the tech, and that's a true statement. Or that both Apple and Google have issues with their platforms causing the disconnects that they need to fix via firmware updates. That may or may not be true, but these platforms are used by millions of people on a daily basis all over the world with a variety of devices. So if there was an issue from both Apple and Google on their side causing this, you'd expect that would be news all over the place and that they would be moving quickly to fix it. I mean, that is a huge problem when you look at scale. Personally, I run CarPlay on multiple vehicles and have been running wireless CarPlay there for a few years. I could probably count on one hand the number of times that I've noticed a wireless CarPlay disconnect with the other devices, but 100% of the time that's happened, the head units have gone back to their native interface and then reconnected to CarPlay shortly after when it recovered. While people have been pointing to Apple and Google on this situation, Soundstream did release a firmware update in August. Although they didn't publish release notes for that update, I don't understand why companies don't do this. So we don't know exactly what defects they were addressing. Soundstream and Volunteer Audio have said that the release addressed some stability issues with wireless CarPlay and Android Auto. I haven't tested this out yet. I'll test that out next week when I leave on my next trip. I'm hoping that Soundstream will be able to implement a more graceful failover for wireless disconnects, and I think that's really the other side of the problem that people aren't talking about. Like I said earlier, I dealt with that for a week, trying to identify any commonality with the failures that I could report back before I just punted and decided to just run wired CarPlay for the rest of my trip by plugging my phone into the OEM USB connection that supports both data and charging before turning on my bike. I've never had a disconnect issue after that, and that was a pretty big deal for me because I would get disconnects with wired CarPlay a lot on the Boom GTS when I'd hit a patch of rough road. I'm okay running wired CarPlay while Soundstream figures this out, and I feel it's already a huge improvement over what I had with the GTS, so I'm pretty happy. The only other issue that I had regarding CarPlay was getting my comms unit working properly with it, but like I said, watch for that video sometime next week. By the way, the cables that you see me using here to plug in, these are the best cables I've ever used. I love these things. I'll put a link to them down in the description of this video, but you can get them different links. These are just under 4 inches. They don't kink. I like the fact that I've been able to color code these things so I know exactly when I see the cable, I know which port it's plugged into on the V2, either the OEM or the charging only. But anyway. The next thing I want to talk about is the quick app switching feature with the thumb control that I mentioned in my first V2 video. The thing that I thought was going to be pretty neat to have. In my experience, over the first 10,000 miles, it's not so great, as it stands today. The problem is that you have to tab through a static set of V2 modules, regardless of whether you use them or not. It takes 10 button presses to cycle through them all and an 11th to get back to where you started. If you want to switch to, say, from CarPlay to the headset screen, you have to press the button 6 times and then 5 more times when you're done messing with that to cycle back to CarPlay. That's if you stop when you're supposed to. And trust me, There will be times that you won't stop and you'll have to cycle through everything again and possibly again and maybe a third time as your anger builds. So I've heard. This is obviously a safety issue. You should not take your eyes off the road that long. It's dangerous. Rather than having to cycle through every module of the V2, including the modules that you never use, and I'm looking at you, Rally Mode, I think the best practice user experience for this would be to provide a way for the user to identify which modules they want to cycle through. They just read from that setting to go to the next module when the button's pushed. I'm not sure how difficult that would be to program, as I'm sure the Maestro is just sending a next signal of some type when the button's pushed. My understanding is that Soundstream is going to change the behavior of this function. I just hope they fix it in a way that it's adaptable to the user in the way they want the experience to go, because it's highly unlikely that they can provide a great experience for 100% of the user base otherwise. So I don't want to sound like a fanboy. I really don't. But I do want to give another shout out to Volunteer Audio. When they started shipping the V2, they created a V2 users page on Facebook for their customers and others to use to get and provide information. It's a private group that you have to request to join. I'll put a link to it down in the description of this video. It's been an amazing source of information over the first 2 to 3 months since the release of the V2. One of the Soundstream VPs also posts information in there from time to time. It's a great way to stay up to date with what's going on with the product. Volunteer Audio is providing information that they're seeing in the group back to Soundstream as far as valid user feedback. And it's clear that Soundstream is paying attention. Since June, they've already released 3 full firmware updates and 1 hot fix to address many of the issues that were identified based on user feedback collected here. And Volunteer Audio is providing direct links to those firmware updates, as well as the updates from iDataLink for Maestro in the Facebook group, along with installation instructions, and they're doing it very quickly. If you do join the group, please understand this is something that Volunteer Audio has taken upon themselves to do of their own accord. They do not have staff dedicated to answering every question or complaint. They're taking this on as extra work for the benefit of the customer base. They don't work 24/7 posting and replying to the page. So show a little grace. I say this because I've seen people's comments complaining that answers are taking too long, that they're not being answered over the weekend, or that the question they've asked, which has been asked and answered 50 times before, but people can't use the search function. It's not being answered again. I also saw some posts on another forum from people who were not only giving out misinformation, stating that this was the official support channel for Soundstream, iDataLink, and Volunteer Audio for the product, and saying, well, let's just say they're being unjustifiably judgmental, and rather rudely at that. Let's close out by addressing a couple of comments and things I've seen pop up from people. We'll start with GPS. Early on, I saw a lot of people complaining about the time it took the iGo Primo Nav system to acquire satellite signals after they installed their V2. I didn't experience that problem. I'll be honest with you. Mine synced up pretty quickly. I mean, I think I was synced within, a couple of minutes. And I'm thinking that a lot of people just don't really understand how GPS works in connecting to the satellite grid. Now, my GPS knowledge is a bit dated, for sure. It's been a long time since I've did anything in this space. But there are essentially, from what I remember, 3 states around time to first fix for satellite acquisition. There's cold, there's warm, and there's hot. And it has to do with what information the unit already has stored before starting to acquire signal. When you first install the V2 and you power it on, go to the nav and initiate the GPS acquisition steps, the unit has no stored positioning information. It doesn't know where it is. This is a cold start. So it will try to acquire signals from, I think, up to 12 satellites. Again, I'm a little bit dated here, so that number could be smaller now. Nonetheless, it can take several minutes for this to happen. Older devices back in the day could take over 10 minutes, sometimes over 15 minutes to do this initial signal acquisition with the satellites. And then there are also environmental considerations that factor into how long it takes as well. If you're powering on from a warmer hot state, meaning that the unit already has some level of information as to its current location, then it can quickly be able to connect to the 3 or 4 satellites that it needs, which will likely only take a few seconds and probably happens, and you probably don't even notice it. So I suspect that most people who've been complaining about this with their installations fall into the category of dealing with a cold state device, meaning it has no local information stored about its relative location because it's right out of the box and you're just turning it on, and it's going to take some time. Maybe 5 to 6 minutes, maybe longer. Another thing I've seen a lot of people ask about is the power button. Is there a way to power off the V2 while the bike is powered on? No, there's not. In all fairness, if memory serves me right, the Harley Boom GTS didn't power off either when you long press that on-off icon on the screen. I believe it simply went into sleep mode and showed, I think it was like a bar and shield and maybe the date and time on the screen. Obviously, I don't have my GTS head unit anymore. If you have one, let me know in the comments below if I'm not remembering that correctly. Not being able to completely power off the V2, for me, isn't a big deal. But I do think it would be nice if Soundstream allowed you to put the V2 into sleep mode, like on the GTS, and maybe display a custom wallpaper or something. We'll talk one more thing, Maestro, the iData Link Maestro. It's the module that integrates with the and communicates with the head unit. That allows you to configure your hand controls to send signals to the hand unit to do things like move around the screen, and also provides data from the ECM into the radio. People have asked if they should get the regular Maestro MMR. That's the one that you update via a USB cable. And again, it resides underneath the fairing, underneath the front fairing, or the MMR2, which you update via Bluetooth through an app on your phone. Just get the MMR2. I think it's only $50 more. We've already had one Maestro update, and I know another one is on the way with the next Soundstream firmware update. You do not want to have to take off your outer fairing every time you need to do a firmware update and plug in a USB cable to that box, or whenever you want to reconfigure the settings on your hand controls to maybe try something new or whatever. It's worth $50 of my time just to avoid taking off my outer fairing once. I'm sure a lot of you probably feel the same way. So just get the Bluetooth version. Okay, bottom line. What do I think about the V2? I am really super happy with my decision to replace the Boom GTS. I consider the issues that I've had with the V2 over the initial couple of months, just like post-release period stuff as an early adopter. And having worked on the bleeding edge of technology for several decades, both as a user and as someone pushing out new products to the market, that's something that I'm used to. Given what I've experienced with Soundstream's rapid response to post-launch issues, I am 100% confident that they're going to continue to tweak, improve, and implement new features with the V2. And get this, the V2 initially shipped with a 2-year warranty. But a couple of weeks ago, one of the VPs at Soundstream let our Facebook V2 group that I mentioned before know that they had decided to increase that warranty for all units, even those already purchased, to 5 years. I mean, come on. When have you seen that happen before? It's nice to know that if I have any problems for the next 5 years with the unit, all I have to do is contact Volunteer Audio and they'll take care of the warranty work for me because I bought the unit through them and they're the ones that are supposed to support the warranty. Super happy with that. This is clearly a company that stands behind their product. So given that we are now past this first few months of tweaking, I would highly recommend the V2 to even non-early adopter types at this point. It's pretty darn stable. They still have some stuff to tweak, and I know they're working on some stuff. I would strongly recommend that you make the purchase through Volunteer Audio, though. I don't want to sound like a fanboy. I have no relationship with them, but what I've observed, what I've experienced over these first few months of having the unit, they have proven to be a really strong partner with Soundstream. They have a great relationship. They are clearly clearly in possession of a strong and trusted voice within Soundstream. Soundstream listens to what they say. And don't forget to join the V2 Facebook group that Volunteer Audio set up. It's a major source of information for the V2 and community, and Volunteer Audio is immediately posting links, like I said, to the firmware updates for the V2 and Maestro as they're made available. I've tried to cover the major points here that I wanted to address in this video. It's definitely not exhaustive. If there's anything else that you want to know about, let me know in the comments below. I'm heading out on the road next week for a 3-week trip. I'll watch the comments and I'll do my best to capture and provide feedback on stuff that I see down there in a video while I'm on the road. Until next week, you guys take care. Peace.